So now that person in the chair there is not actually Charles. This is a disclaimer, but Charles turns out is very embedded in gender bias in his realm of interest and study and production, apparently. And he's been talking about the value of all of us, I think, looking into using AI to look into AI and what's going on with gender bias. And what I'm going to do is let Charles take the reins, and you can go ahead and click on this right here. There you go. And that should take us to that. And if we can get Charles up and running here, you can, if you don't mind, beginning your speaking to this, that would be great.
Okay, thanks, Bill. I think just for context, the reason I'm interested in this topic is I recently wrote a book, co-authored a book called Two Wings of Leadership: Balancing Feminine and Masculine Power in Life and Organizations. And the book the book is based on the metaphor that Abdu'l-Baha uses about the two wings of a bird, that humanity is a bird composed of two wings, and that one of them is woman and the other one is man. And not until both wings are equally strong can the bird of humanity fly towards its highest heights. And so this metaphor, coupled with a lifetime of experience working in the corporate world all over the world, got me and a co-author, Monica Martinez Vargas, who lives in Chile, to write this book about our experience, about how those two wings had not been really balanced in our experience working in the world and in corporations. And so we wanted to try to bring that metaphor to life. And so then once we did write this book, I started thinking a lot about how the feminine and the masculine energies of life are not really balanced in the world, because we live in a male dominated world where the masculine influence is still much stronger than the feminine. But Monica and I really believe that the feminine and the masculine are inside every human being. It's not just a question of men and women, it's a question of those energies and that power being balanced within each individual. So we address the concept of imbalance in our book, and the solution that we offer is the integration of both in society, in organizations, and in life, so that humanity can reach its highest heights. And so that's the pretext of my desire to use AI, is to help positively influence the discourse on this particular topic of gender balance. And so I started really thinking about how much bias exists in something that has been predominantly generated by men. And so when I started this research, just for the benefit of this course, it was basically 5 simple prompts. I wanted to just start very simply with the concept of bias. And is bias of any kind, is bias of any kind in AI models a real thing? That was the first prompt. And it basically came back, and we can scroll down, we don't have to read all the details, but it basically came back saying, yes, bias is a real thing. There's evidence of it. Here are some important considerations, et cetera, et cetera. Why AI companies work hard to reduce bias. You guys can look at all this in greater detail. I'm not going to take everybody's time right now to do it, except that I'm going to go through the prompts pretty quickly, just to say that the second prompt was, how does gender bias most notably show up in AI responses? And so then it started penetrating a little more deeply, and it went to occupational stereotypes. It went to assumptions about roles in stories or examples. It talked about descriptive language differences, uh, and it kept going to unequal representation, pronoun bias in translation, and on and on and on. And so advice or career guidance also showed up, sexualization or objectification. And then it had some important considerations to consider at the end of that prompt. So then we could go to the third prompt, and the third prompt was basically in yellow here. What are human qualities traditionally associated with the masculine and with the feminine? And right here, I was just trying to see what AI would come up with on its own, because we talk a lot about this in the book, these human qualities that make up the masculine and feminine qualities that society needs to embody for us to achieve peace and harmony and reach our highest potential. And so when I got to this particular prompt, AI already went into its history and it pulled up the book. And here it says, across many cultures, traditions, and psychological frameworks, people have long associated certain human qualities with the masculine and others with the feminine. Importantly, these qualities are not inherently tied to biological sex, which is a main point that we make in the book. And then it actually came up with an example from the book. It went in, I guess I had conversed with it enough that it went back in and got information from my conversations about the book and the contents of the book that at least this AI model is aware of. So it says, given your book on two wings of leadership, the distinction is very close to the metaphor of two wings of a bird. Humanity advances when both sets of qualities develop together. And then it listed out qualities traditionally associated with the masculine. We can scroll down. And then, most of these things are common to us. And then uh, qualities traditionally associated with the feminine. And it talked about these qualities are often connected with relations. The qualities associated with the feminine are more connected with relationship, integration, and care for the human dimension. And it talks about things like empathy, compassion, nurturing, collaboration, intuition, patience, receptivity, listening, inclusion, emotional intelligence, care for well-being, harmony building, sensibility to context. So these were, if we analyze the condition of the world and the complexity of the world, we will likely come to the conclusion that these are some of the most missing qualities in human organization and in human life today. So this was interesting that it highlighted the difference between what has traditionally been seen as masculine, what has traditionally been seen as feminine. And now it sort of comes to another, we can scroll down a little further. Feminine qualities are often described as oriented toward connection, integration, care, relational awareness, community, and sustainability. In leadership languages, these show up as psychological safety, team cohesion, stakeholder engagement, mentoring, and development. And we can scroll down even further. It sort of gives a helpful contrast. We don't have to go in great detail right here, but we can stop just here for a second. An excess masculine without feminine, our book and the research asserts, has led in many organizations to burnout, hyper competition, short-term thinking, low trust cultures. And then our book also documents that excess feminine without masculine can lead to some undesirable outcomes as well. So the book challenges people to look for the integration and a healthy balance, not substituting one for the other, but finding what is the intended balance in society that we need to be seeking. You can scroll down. So then we got to the fourth prompt, which was, does society in general place greater value on either feminine or masculine traits you describe? And so I wanted to understand from the AI's perspective, uh, given that it was able to differentiate between what is traditionally masculine and traditionally feminine, what is the value society places on one or the other? And this prompt showed clearly that we can scroll down, but it showed clearly that historical patterns of value show much greater value attributed to the masculine. And it was sort of this point of understanding that I sort of already had intuitively, but I wanted to have the AI model confirm it. And it confirmed that, we need to understand how to value the feminine balance in society that we're looking for. And historically, we have not done that. And so that led me to the fifth prompt, which we can go to. So the fifth prompt, then I came back directly to this particular premise. Given the premise of the book, Two Wings of Leadership, how can I use AI to positively influence societal discourse and the evolution of AI models so that the feminine power we all have within us is valued as much as the masculine, and the bird of humanity achieves maximum flight? And so then here it actually gave 10 really concrete strategies of how we can use AI to influence the discourse on this particular issue and topic. And I thought it was very helpful for my own learning, because it informs me of how to use the message of the book that we wrote to help get it out into society for maximum benefit. And so I don't necessarily want to take more time of the group with my own research or my own initiative, but I just felt very empowered by the ability of the tools that we have in this day and age to help us get our message out and to do some good with that message. So I think I'll stop here, and if people want to just scroll through real quick, if we can just scroll through the first one, use AI to name and expose imbalance. Okay, that's one tactic. Build a new language of legitimacy. We can research what that really means later. Then the third one was refuse the trap of reversal. The fourth one was use AI to generate better examples of leadership. The fifth one was create prompt frameworks that encode balance. The sixth one, feed the public sphere with thoughtful AI-assisted content. And it gave a whole host of ways to do that. So I already started figuring out things that I can do. And then number 7, we can go to that. 7 was contribute to the evolution of AI models through feedback and evaluation. And then number 8 was develop benchmark content around balanced leadership. And so gave me a lot of ideas for how to use the book, et cetera, et cetera. Use AI uh, to dignify overlooked forms of contribution. And we know that there have been many overlooked forms of contribution when it comes to women, because typically anything that was not paid work or paid labor was never recognized in the same light. And then number 10, I think, is anchor all of it in a moral and spiritual vision. And here it was encouraging of using the vision presented in the book. And so that's basically a summation of the research that I did and some of what it taught me. And I just appreciate everybody's attention and encourage you to look at it in more detail if you'd like.
That is amazing.
Well, hello, everybody that's come in since we started. It's good to see everybody. Linda, Keith, he was here. So I'm sure there's some people with some thoughts and questions here.
Charles, was this the Chat GBT that you used?
Yes, it was. And I use Gemini for a lot of things. I use Chat GPT for a bunch. And I'll just mention that Notebook LM is a Google product. And Bill mentioned it, and the previous presentation was done on it. And one thing about Notebook LM that is very useful, you have to populate it with the documents that you want to do research on. So you kind of turn them into PDF files, and then you populate Notebook LM with those files, and then you can use that as a database that you've constructed and have hold of, but you can do massive amounts of research with that smaller database that you created. So even before writing the book, I had put an outline of the book in Notebook LM, and then Notebook LM has a tool of creating little podcasts. So I had put an outline, my co-author and I, we had a clear outline of the book we were writing. And so we put that in Notebook LM, and it created an initial podcast of what the book might eventually sound like or look like, a conversation about the book. And the book hadn't yet been written, but just based on the outline that we put in there, it created this podcast. And it was a very empowering experience because it gave us a vision to go forward with the book. We already had the outline, but then the podcast gave us a vision of what to go forward with. And then a year later, when we finished writing the book, I came back with the full manuscript of the book as a PDF file and put it back into Notebook LM and asked it now to create a real podcast from the book. And that podcast is online if anybody ever wants to listen to it. But I'm just highlighting the incredible tools, AI tools that we have access to, because they take your imagination to places that your imagination won't go to on its own. And then that creates a greater stimulus for you to do more or do different things or go a different way. And so these tools are amazing. I got way off the intent of your question. Your question was very simple. So the first answer, I think, was yes, I do use Chat GPT.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that.
But
Yeah, sorry, I have a senior's moment. I forgot where the raise hand thing is. A couple of quick questions, and it's not just to Charles, it's general, has anyone noticed, or is it just me, that many AI tools, or I shouldn't say many, this ChatGPT, they seem to profile users, profile us, and they very quickly look into your background, look at your handles on different social media, and on some topics, they tend to they have a tendency to feed us what we like to hear. On social media, for example, Instagram definitely, Instagram just keeps on feeding people what they seem to like more and more because they can sell advertising. And on that, I wonder, Charles, I have the text of what you presented. Wonder if I might take it to another AI engine and ask the questions without them knowing your book and see what it comes back with. And hopefully, if there's anything to share, I'll do that next week. That was my only question.
But that would be very helpful to me. And what you said is absolutely true. Most AI models sort of feed you what they think you want to hear. And I've had to often question, say, that's not really what I asked for, or that's where did you get that assumption from, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree with you. You do have to be very, very careful. And I still don't know the level to which I've already fed AIs different information that they're now using to profile me with. So it'll be really interesting if you do some research and then come back and share a little bit of that with me, or help me compare and contrast how the research came back when it was you asking versus me asking. If you don't mind running a simple test, even with 2 or 3 of those prompts, to see if you get similar responses, or if the responses you get are totally different than the ones I got, that would give me some valuable data.
I will do that, and if it's so the same, then it's still good information, it's positive information. But I have tried that before this course on with ChatGPT and another one on one of my own topics, and I did get different answers and different information, slightly different answers, suggestions, and it was on a political matter. On a war issue. So yes, I will try that and see what we can find out. I think when I was reading your paper document, your prompt, I was reading, trying to catch up a lot of things. I might be wrong. When you asked a bias question, I think it also clarified what bias means. And it said something that, AI works on information on the internet, both true and false. Do you recall that? So that was interesting that it shared that, and I think some engines have a way of filtering out this information if they want to.
Well, this is interesting. Nora, what you got?
I got a question. You're talking about ChatGPT had your book in there and it pulled it right up and all that stuff, right? And so is this going to be cross-pollinated over to other AI systems?
I don't know for sure, but I've asked Gemini questions related to the book. And so I'm sure between Gemini, which is a Google product, and ChatGPT, at least those two will have it. But it's possible others may have it by now too, since I've probably been conversing with them for the last 6 months at least.
It seems pretty important because, if you want this stuff to become universal, you really want to cross-pollinate it and get it into all of them if you can.
Great suggestion, Norm.
Linda?
Just congratulations on such a very interesting publication of that book, and how you've helped us to think about AI. What I'm really intrigued with is the thought processes, and my impression is that AI is helping us draw on all human knowledge to the present, so that we have much greater something to do, maybe as collective consciousness, or I don't know. But so at every stage of this course, I'm wondering, say, thinking about the capacities of our mind and what we're learning. And for example, the Institute process basically is to derive understanding from the revelation and then try to apply it and figure out what the implications are. And it's a kind of a process like that. So what if, for example, you had just gone directly, you hadn't written the book, you'd just gone directly with such a wonderful idea of how can I best influence societal discourse through a book and a podcast, and in 1 minute, you would have had a book. Would that have been an ideal way of saving time and more quickly, influencing? Or the fact that you and your colleague went through how many years of thinking about what the writings say and your experience and coming up with that book, even with the help maybe of AI to organize it and so on. I'm just wondering how we can stretch our own powers to the maximum, as you did, and then use AI to enrich and maybe draw on things that we can't access and speed up certain things, but not to replace the process.
So, Linda, I don't know if I have the best answer for you. I'll just say that for me, it was an organic process that I've been struggling with for 40 years.
Yes.
The writing of this book was 40 years in the making, from the time I was in a women's studies class at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I came to grips with the realization that I believed in the principle of equality of women and men, but that was not a reality of the world that I lived in. I was in a class called Women, Social Institutions, and Social Change. And every day we were confronted with statistics about the reality of the world for women. And I had grown up with 5 older sisters and a mother who had raised me, had a tremendous influence on me. And I grew up with the teaching of the equality of women and men. And I believed wholeheartedly in this principle. And then
Yes.
all of a sudden, I came to my reality, my sense of what was real was shattered in that class. And every single day I was in that class, I kept slouching lower and lower in my seat, feeling this pain and anguish of injustice. And then the realization that I, as a man, had to do something about it. If that new reality was real, I had this mother, I had these sisters, I had all these influences in my life, and the issue of justice demanded that I do something. So for me, it was a journey of and I'm not saying I stood still for 40 years in my life. I've been committed to this principle, but it was a journey that I had to traverse to get to the point of having the clarity to write this book and the
Absolutely.
experiences to write this book. So I don't know if I would have had the maturity to enter any kind of Chat GPT or Gemini or AI model to even ask that question.
Exactly. That's really what I'm
without the
saying.
experience.
That's
Yeah.
that's wonderful to me. Just affirming what I'm feeling about. I mean, AI can't replace those 40 years of reflection and experience and influence from your family and so on. it should only enhance. Otherwise, I don't know if I was clear in that. I think we're so enriched by the fact that you did go through those 40 years and you did come up with the book. And if you had maybe wanted to, a sudden insight and you had done it in 1 minute, that would have, I don't know if it would have the influence, even maybe spiritual influence, because what were we just seeing in book 14, I think, but understanding, or book 7, understanding is the greatest motivator. So all that you've acquired from your experience and so on. Even say at the beginning of this course, if we had with Bill thought, what should the principles be of using AI? What writings would we refer to? And sort of come up with it. It's just a different process. I'm trying to sort it out. Because I can just add one little thing. It happened to be a university student, a young woman that I've known for a while, and she said that she had restrained herself from using AI, and she found that friends were using it. And then she thought, well, just to outline something, an assignment. And she felt that her brain capacity was being atrophied even by doing that. Then she couldn't go back. She couldn't go back and think it through, because these are the things I'm kind of struggling with. So I really appreciate everyone's input and how to have this discernment that I think someone just put in the chat. And not, sorry, I have one more question. You said, like, traditionally, I've tried to understand from my son, who knows much more than I do about it. What is the totality of everything that's in AI so far? Who kind of set the parameters and drew it all in? Does it really draw on, it's the average, he tells me. It's not, AI is not reasoning. It's drawing the average likelihood of what would be said in response to that, according to the prompt you give it. So when we say traditionally, or here's what society thinks, that's one constraint. Does it really draw on everything equally, like ancient, I don't know, African wisdom and so on? And secondly, is that the new meaning that the revelation is giving to these concepts? Maybe there's more than drawing on past language. And thank you for letting me express those. And thanks so much. A beautiful example.
I think Farhad has been waiting.
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments on bias versus stereotypes. I think it was interesting that the response, for your first couple of questions there really reiterated that it's not AI that's being biased. AI is just feeding back the bias in the material that it's learned from. And another term for that would be stereotypes. So it's just feeding back those stereotypes. So on the one hand, when we don't like the stereotype, we call it bias, and it's a bad thing. On the other hand, when we want to, we kind of agree with the concept of stereotypes in the sense that, as you outlined, male and female qualities are kind of stereotypes. And yet we sort of accept that distinction, even though to me it's another form of bias. And yet, in the one hand, we're happy to take that distinction, and on the other hand, we don't like something that just feeds us back stereotypes. So that's just a thought. But then the other suggestion would be somehow, if we don't like the bias and those stereotypes, then maybe when we query AI about certain things, we have to explicitly say, reverse your bias or reverse the bias that you've been trained on in order to give, a more I guess, truthful or all-encompassing answer.
Well, I think this is kind of, what's been discussed here is essentially what is our who. I guess we start off with what is our relationship with AI, which brings us to who are we? We are a party to that relationship. So who are we? What do we bring to that relationship? And I think this is something that Linda and Charles were, both kind of getting at. And if we're aware that AI is essentially learning our biases, sensing the biases in our prompting, and then feeding it back to us, how do we correct what we're giving it? We can't rely on AI to correct our bias. What we can do, though, is look at what it's doing and discipline ourselves to the next level, so that when we're communicating, we are removing that bias. We're not necessarily getting rid of it in who we are, but we're putting it aside just for the sake of achieving a level of objectivity that might give us a cleaner, more forthright response. So I think it really comes down to if we're using AI as a crutch to get us through our ability to seek the truth and to discern the difference between one thing and the other, then yes, we will be like that young lady you're talking about, who is concerned about not being able to operate on her own, essentially, of that dependency. And I think for younger people, they're much more vulnerable to that kind of thing, because they're still developing their strength of character, their strength of disciplined thinking, and such as that. So one could see that these things could be dangerous, to in many ways, just like, but we have to realize that social media could be and has been very dangerous and destructive. All of these things have the potential to be bad, and the whole idea is that they also have the potential to be useful and good, and that depends on what we do with this technology. So I'm not saying that that's a perfect metaphor for what the possibilities are, but I think that if we approach it with the idea that we want to extract from it the good that it offers, we've seen many examples of how people's creativity or capacities were enhanced or accelerated by using AI. And when Charles brings his 40 years to the situation, and has that 40 years picked up and zoomed forward into the harvest process of taking what he's invested in that, you might say, integrated process, and bringing it forward, much faster than he would be as an individual. Because if he just wrote a book 10 years ago and put out a podcast, it would go out there and a few people would buy it, your family and academics, were very focused on these kinds of things. But now it's training the mindsets of AI. It's offsetting. There may be untruth in AI, but if nobody ever puts a truth out there to balance it, then those untruths become the truth. You up, Norman?
Yeah. What I'm thinking is this having this conversation and having that book become part of ChatGPT. The actual content of the book now has become part of the consciousness of the ChatGPT. It's part of the consciousness. You can't get rid of it. It's in there. And I think it's so important that we get content like that into the consciousness of the AI. And if nobody puts things like that into it, then it doesn't have any kind of, it's just going to be picking up the same old stuff that is of no value or hardly.
It's well said, Norman.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My first name is Sohail, last name is Mohajir Jasmi. But I have a question. The conversation I heard, I think Charles was saying that he'd had prior conversations with ChatGPT or whatever AI model. And based on that, the responses were sort of tempered by the previous information he may have provided to it. So that raises the question in my mind. And of course, I want to say that if somebody else would have, I think Mr. Derakhshani was suggesting that he's going to do research, putting the same prompts and seeing what kind of reaction he gets. It raises the question to me that, see, I've heard that, or I've read that, there's millions of parameters that are in the model. And by probably when we're asking a question or directing it, some of these parameters are set because the feedback we get, I heard that is tailored to what we've already been thinking. So are there like local models of these large language models that are tailored between individuals who are interacting with it? Or I'm just asking a question, I have no idea. This question came to me after listening to the conversation. Or is it like similar to cookies, that if I ask a certain question, there's certain parameters that probably are locally stored in my device, and next time that I bring up a question in that field, those local parameters determine what response the large language model gives me. Any thoughts on that? Because I heard both of these ideas to say cross-pollinating. If these are like local parameters that result in responses from the AI model to what we've already may have fed it or prior conversations, then this becomes a very local thing. And how then could it be cross-pollinating to other AIs or other? I hope my question or my puzzle is clear the way I'm expressing it. Any thoughts on that? How is it can be localized? In other words, tailoring the responses based on previous conversations we've had, and then how could this sort of cross-pollinate to other and affect other conversations? Thank you. I just put myself on mute.
To me, that's a really good question. I think that what it really gets to is it has multiple tasks that's happening here. One is it's creating and using a profile of information that it has on you as an individual, and that informs what it's feeding back to you to some degree.
So that profile is stored on my device?
No, it's stored on AI.
On millions of sites? It is, I could sort of think of like a cookie-like type thing that is stored on the device, and every time I sort of interface with the large language model, these are specific, individualized information that goes with my query. But thinking that all of these profiles, billions of it, is actually stored someplace. But anyway,
yes.
Yeah, all right.
Yes, the profile is it may temporarily be cached on your hard drive or your system, but and I'm sure there's some AI systems out there that have a variation on how they handle it, but generally it keeps a history of you for your own use as well as for its use, and that history is not something that's sort of stored on your hard drive. So there's that, but if you assume that this is one of the things that it's doing, the other thing that it's doing is that it's it's using logic and it's using information that it gathers from the rest of the world of information that's accessible.
Logic or probability?
For the words that it uses, that's probability. In terms of how it chooses the next word and such as that, that's probability. But in terms of thought, the aspects of thought that it performs is that of logic. And I think that's pretty objective. And I think that's something that's been mentioned here is that AI doesn't have these biases. AI is just, fed a database of information and an algorithm from which to manage that information. But it doesn't become the bias, it doesn't absorb into its own, you might say, personality or not personality. It just essentially compiles it into the format that it thinks is going to be able to address who you are and what you're after. And the thing is that it's who you are that makes a big difference in the qualitative. When you present yourself to an individual that you've never met before, that you want to establish a relationship with, it's who you are that matters what the outcome is. And with an individual, that's not all that matters. It also matters who they are that determines that relationship. With AI, it's more about who you are and what parameters that AI is operating within to essentially deal with who you are. Does it have an agenda, like to sell you something, or to bias, to create a bias in you, or to just gain your confidence and trust by feeding your bias and reinforcing it? All of these things can be, put into algorithms and programmed, and people are talking about how this is happening with Instagram and such as that. And it's pretty obvious. But there are, I think, AI elements out there that are objective and that they're just feeding you what you bring to it plus what you're asking for. Because if you're asking for something and it's not able to bring you what it thinks you want, then it's never going to be able to respond to your question. So I don't know if that quite gets it there. What